Okay. Recording in progress. All right. Shall we go around and do a quick round of intros? Does everybody in the group know each other by now, or do we still have a couple folks that are new? No,
I think we're good, aren't we?
We're all good. We can see one another's names. Okay. So then in terms of updates from the policy committee meeting on Monday, I think just about everybody from the steering committee was there. My only takeaways that I had to report back from the meeting was that there was a request for the steering committee to develop some kind of policy for emergency projects. And so that's something, I don't know which committee should be the one to address that, but that is a specific request that they had.
Angie, I have a question on that.
Yeah.
I was very unclear on what that request meant, because I want to make sure the policy committee realizes the project applications do not come to the policy committee for review, and the process is subcommittee, steering committee, Chisago SWC board. And so I was unclear if that was what the question was about, because to me, I'm very unclear. And Emily, maybe you can help clarify this, because it was your supervisor that brought that question forward, and some others then echoed that concerns, but I'm not clear what they're looking for, because the only thing I could understand would be if we said we're not going to fund projects moving forward that have already started. That's the only thing I can think of.
My impression was that they wanted to have a policy for addressing emergencies that might come up and need to be dealt with quickly that didn't fit within the normal time frame. Because I think that was their thought, like, well, this sounded like a big project that needed to be dealt with, and it was, you know, there was time constraints involved. And might there be something like that in the future where there's a sudden opportunity with short notice that the group wants to use the funds for, but we should have a policy for how that happens. That was my impression.
Is that a policy committee? And I'm not trying to avoid the policy committee. Is that a policy committee decision on the WBIF funds?
I don't think it probably is. And when I heard the question, my thought was any project we fund has to be consistent with our grant work plan. And we can be nimble enough, and have already proven that we can be, that the idea of whether it's short-term or in some natural emergency, natural disaster, we can respond quickly. I don't know that there's a separate policy.
I think my 2 cents would be, you know, because the steering committee meets once a month regularly. And, you know, that's pretty frequent, but maybe we could say, maybe it's as simple as saying, in an emergency situation, the steering committee can convene, can be called to a meeting more quickly, like say, so the emergency happens the day after our steering committee meeting today. Maybe we meet not just a month away, but even sooner, and just speed up that process that we've already laid out. Because I think having laid out this flow chart that me, Angie, and Barbara have been working on will kind of help clarify that, like assuring them, yes, we do have a process now. They didn't like how that project started before, and none of us did, but I think we can just kind of tweak what we already have just to say, this is how we would speed up the timeline if needed.
Dan, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Why would you be addressing emergency situations with WBIF funds? You pretty much have a process laid out for those funds. So I guess I'm not following what the issue or the situation is that it would be an emergency that you have to do something with. I mean, you have a whole process for identifying funds and doing them. To me, if there's an emergency, you would be dealing it with your organization's regular processes.
I think
that's not
Craig's.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that was Craig's, confusion as well, because I think, I don't know, I mean, maybe it's a misunderstanding of the process, or we made too big of a deal of the approving it after the fact. But I think it's more of what are the criteria when we could approve after the fact. because they did talk about criteria for making decision and provide guidance for, the steering committee. So that to me was a take on it, was in what conditions might we do an after the fact approval? Instead of just saying we're not going to do it ever again. It might be an emergency, or a project might need to move forward quickly because of a number of reasons. So that was kind of my take. It wasn't really clear to me either as to what it was for, because we were specifically saying we weren't going to do after the fact anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think perhaps when Matt was talking about the fact that there was a big rain event and a ton of erosion happening, it might have put the idea in their head that this was like this had suddenly come up and was a sudden thing that needed to be addressed immediately.
Yeah, I don't think that was the case though. On this happened because, they had this project and these funds started, but going forward, you're already gonna, the funds are there, and I don't see it. It shouldn't happen again. I don't think it should go through the regular process, but my 2 cents for what they mean anymore.
They mean about a penny now, Dan. They're just about done.
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
soon to be a half cent.
So your last hurrah, Dan, could be sending a message to the policy committee saying that we don't need guidance for emergency situation.
Well, I just feel, if we had to call an emergency meeting, we have a planning team. Planning team could do a quick, let's say tomorrow, we have, I don't know what the emergency would even be, but let's say we had an emergency arise, the planning team could say, we're going to call a steering committee meeting next week. Or you could have an executive committee for that matter. But I was very confused by that statement. And again, I want to make sure that we're answering their questions and getting the policy committee what they want. But there's also things that I don't think that we need to worry about. So, sorry, go ahead, Jay.
The only thing I want to add to that is they also talked about criteria for guidance for us to make decisions. And that's not.
Which we're developing.
Right, but that doesn't address the issue of, having an extra steering committee meeting like they were. So maybe it's just they didn't read between the lines or hear that we were actually already developing those criteria.
Maybe. So maybe when October comes and we're meeting again, it's just a matter of hopefully by then the criteria are developed and walking through the criteria with them.
And then in an emergency situation, we could have an extra steering committee meeting, and that's how we address it.
Yep.
I think so. And I think that the type of emergency I can actually imagine coming up and us needing that quick action for is a project that's underway and it hits a stumbling block. Maybe there's some digging and they unearth an unforeseen hazard, a burial of appliances or something. And there's new costs that they weren't expecting and they got to get this done. And we can do that. We could just do a short-term or a quick meeting.
The only problem there is I would have to do a turnaround quick meeting for my board because we don't have the authorization to amend the extra funds.
Right.
Yep.
So we could put that in there as a process for emergency meetings, but just remember that ultimately it has to go back to my board still. So that's the hard part. Is that, Emily, do you think that works okay for your supervisor with about those questions?
I think so. And I agree with what we're saying. I think it was part misconception about what we've already got in the works, and part maybe blowing up the emergency aspect of the Washington project. But yeah, I think it could be as simple as like a footnote of, if needed, we can speed this process up, but we've got that. So we can maybe just add that as a footnote to this flow chart that we're working on. Angie and Barbara, do you think that would be easy enough?
Yeah. Well, and we didn't share the flow chart with the policy committee because we didn't have it quite perfected.
Yeah.
So perhaps when we share that in October and what these criteria are, that will be a way to address what their questions and concerns were Monday.
I think so.
I guess my recommendation would be just have, if someone has a concern, emergency that arises, they make sure they contact one of the planning team members. The planning team member can call a quick meeting to pull together the steering committee and go forward. Thank you.
Right. I don't know that I have anything additional to say about the project tour, except that we, Barbara and I will work on getting the logistics scheduled for that, to do that on September 27th, 4 till 6 p.m. And, you know, logistics in terms of, is the construction done in the neighborhood where our office is? And can we rent a bus and things like that? And do we have willing landowners who don't mind having a bus full of elected officials show up at their place? So then, sorry, I'm typing and talking at the same time. I'm going to show the newest version of the flow chart that Barbara developed for decision-making process. And there we go. Can everybody see that? Okay, so Barbara, since it's yours, do you want to walk people through it? I mean, I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory, but maybe if she's walking through, if anybody sees anything that you think doesn't make sense or needs to be tweaked, speak up.
Yeah, and so Emily is the one who provided me with the majority of this verbiage, but we did tweak it a little bit. Oop, we lost it, Angie.
Oh, coming back.
Sorry.
You're trying to multitask, Angie.
You're multitasking and it's lovely.
You know what I don't understand is, like, usually I'm able to have windows open in the background while something's being shared and it still shows up, but okay. All right, sounds good. I'm trying to take notes while sharing my screen.
It's good. And so Emily's the one that provided the majority of this verbiage. I've tweaked it a little bit. In the first round, there's this understanding of the different project applications that subcommittees are putting together. And then there is a form that goes also to the steering committee. And that's the template that Emily's developed, and it's got the voting table on it. And so as we continue to try to work out, you know, what these project applications look like, how they can be consistent, and being able to potentially incorporate the template that Emily's put together. And so you really have just kind of one packet of material that is moving through this process. And so with the help of some fun emojis, mostly just kind of speaking to, you have the partner come with the form. That form goes to the steering committee. They discuss it, decide it, and then are able to, to the subcommittee, and then it goes to the full steering committee, and then it has to go to Craig's board. And then after the project, still kind of wrapping up with that invoice piece as well. And so this is mostly just to kind of give an outline of that process. We can add or tweak things as needed. One of the things that Angie said and suggested was making sure that there was some mention of the policy committee on there. And so I added that. That's the most recent piece that I added last night. And it's just kind of at the top, kind of as a pre-flow sort of note. But I can modify this in any way that people want to modify it, and whatever I can do to make it more clear or helpful. That's what I can do. Hi, Jay.
Hi, this is awesome. A couple comments. Number one, I don't want every subcommittee to have a separate flow chart. So this shouldn't be just for implementation. It should be for just subcommittee.
Okay.
So anytime we're going to be asking for funding, I have a question of, like, how do we distinguish between a item where the steering committee is going to be making a recommendation or where it's just for information? And so I think we might want to have just information items. Like, for example, the agronomist contract, that's an information item for the steering committee, not a decision item, because we already have an agreement with Chisago for that work. So just a couple thoughts. Overall, I think this is really nice. And it exemplifies the complexity of partnerships.
I think I mean, it does make it look simpler though, because it's like, at least you can see. For the policy committee, I'm thinking for them, it helps them to understand what's going on in the background.
I just had a couple of thoughts, like, this is awesome, but I'm thinking about like 2 months down the road when I forget who's on subcommittees or there's a new staff person, like, could there be a backside to it that has like, this is who you send this to? And then I was thinking about timelines too, like, can someone submit an application at any point in time, or will we have some, like, these are your
Rolling
periods that you
deadlines.
send it?
Mhm.
I like that.
And wasn't that a question that Susanna said they are considering as well for the internal analyses? Like, will they have one time per year when they take applications, or a rolling deadline? I think Jamie, you might have talked about that as well with the wetlands.
Both those committees.
Yeah. Jerry?
Yeah, we've been having this discussion back and forth for the last few days, but it's the question what to do about the Chisago Lakes Lake Improvement District. And I've been advocating that the Lake Improvement District can be a project lead or project sponsor. I understand that we can't do contracts, the county does contracts, but I can think of instances where we would have a project that we would like to submit, and we're really the primary sponsor or lead. And how do we fit into this flow chart? I understand there's agreements already in place with Chisago Soil and Water and Board of Water and Soil Resources and whatnot, but I'd like to see somehow the Lake Improvement District fit into this process, maybe a little bit more explicitly, or because to me, it doesn't really make sense to, the Lake Improvement District has a project and then we have to go and find someone at the county that's willing to submit the proposal. If there's a way we can fit the Lake Improvement District into this flow chart and still make sense. I know we're like the odd stepchild kind of thing, but if there's a way to make it work, I would welcome it. So I'm just throwing that out.
Jerry, can I ask for an example? Because I think I have the answer for you on that one, but if you could give me an example of a type of project you're looking at.
Well, like a couple things. One, say if we have a channel and weir project where we have to put in a new weir. Certainly the county could apply for it, but it's really a Lake Improvement District project. I also think of like examples like Soil and Water and the county have a contract every year for lid projects. And, granted the contract is with the county, but it's lid projects. So it would just be, I think, better if we could actually be the lead on projects that we're the lead on. So
yeah, looking back, and I was part of that email, Jamie, appreciate that. And I agree. The JPA is pretty clear on a party or parties. It's the 16 members of the JPA. And then I sent out just minutes for this meeting to that subcommittee, the language from the Bowser WBIF policy, which very clearly states that has to be a member of it outlines the information that SWC county or watershed organization that meets those criteria has adopted the plan, which unfortunately the lid is not and can't be, unfortunately. And that's why they can't be part of the policy committee directly. They can't be part of the JPA. I realize Mr. Mergens is appointed to the board via one of the two at-large members, just like Mr. Peterson is from the north. But my thought process was the lid could work through the county, which you're an employee of, or the lid could specifically work through the SWCD and remove the Chisago SWC as a fiscal agent. We're one of the 16 member partners, and we could have an agreement with the Chisago SWC as a non-fiscal agent, could have an agreement just like the county could have an agreement with the lid, and then you guys could do that work. So I think we can get it done. We just can't have you being one of the 16 partners because you're not signatory to the JPA, unfortunately, and that's spelled out pretty clearly in both the JPA and Bowser policy.
Yeah, and I understand that, and that makes sense. I just wanted everyone to kind of keep in mind that we're here, and that we will be the actual lead on projects, although we're not a signatory agency and we won't have a contract, but we would be the lead. And so I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, for me, Jerry, it's no different than if we have a contract with a landowner to do a project, they're the lead on doing that project. But if funding still comes through one of the partners, one of the 16 partners. Unfortunately, the LID can't be one of those 16 partners.
Yeah, and I understand.
Okay, we'll make it work.
Right. Any other conversation on this flow chart?
I do agree we need to add into the policy committee more than just the top. So I don't know if we want to put after the finish, update the policy committee, or, update on meetings, something like that, just so it does state. So the policy committee feels they have buy-in.
Yeah. Yeah, I know when I first looked at it and the policy committee wasn't on there at all, I was like, ooh, I wouldn't want to bring this to them because I know that right away they would look and say, what about us?
We want them to feel important.
Form a joint powers entity and they'll have a lot more say in this.
Okay, so let's take away that for a minute. Sorry, well, I took and talk at the same time. Decision-making flow chart. Okay, so then there was the steering committee recommendation template. That is just the form for people to use when they are bringing forward. Do folks need me to show that, or did you all take a look at it already? I can bring in if need be. Want me to share? Not share?
I'm nodding with Craig.
Is the nod going up and down or side to side?
To nod.
It's a nod. Okay, nod, not a shake. Is that what the deal is? Okay.
Matt Downing's giving a thumbs up for nod.
Okay. This is not the right thing. What are you seeing? Where did what I thought I was sharing go? Okay, are you now looking at the form? Are you memorandum?
We're seeing your policy. We're seeing your minutes you're taking from today, from today.
Okay, right. Let me stop sharing.
Craig Mel's a pain in the butt. What's that mean?
Yeah, he kind of is. Okay. Now are you seeing the memo?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, I'm not sure why it's having so much trouble with screen sharing today. Okay, so this would be the form that requesting organizations are using when bringing forward a project to steering committee. And you have an example of this filled out with the form for the Catholic Solution Project in Pine County that came or is coming to the steering committee today. But just, asking for all the kinds of information that a steering committee might reasonably need to be able to approve or disapprove a project. And then project plan will have attached as well. Does this look good? Does everybody feel good about this form? Any changes needed?
I think this is a great start. If we can run it a few times and see if we need to tweak it after that.
Yes, Craig.
So one question, under required attachments, project plan / visual / map. Visual / map, can you explain that to me maybe a little more?
Emily, do you want to, was that just like pictures or a map or some kind of schematic for what the project is going to be so that people know what the project is?
Is a slash an and or an or an and / or?
That's what I'm wondering.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My internet dropped, and so I joined by phone. The required attachment project plan / visual / map, that was an or, and kind of a suggestion, whatever, some kind of visual would probably make sense. So, whatever helpful visual to illustrate the project.
So like an aerial photo would be good. I think we also need legal description, don't generally, for doing the e-link reporting, you're going to need the quarter legal description.
Yep, and that's at least, if the steering committee wanted at that point, good. We're definitely getting the latitude and longitude in that invoice template.
Correct. Yeah.
So there's a lot of overlap between this and the invoice template, so it'll be some duplication. It'll be easy. They'll just be able to type it in, and a few of those kind of details will be new once they get to the invoice template. But I just started with, here's what I thought the steering committee would want to see to decide if this is worth funding.
All right, and then the page 2 of this is for tracking votes on projects for our records. And
this, again, I don't think this was based on any policy or anything, but because last time we didn't take a formal vote, it waited and if anybody said nay. But I thought, if we just want to have a record keeping process, this makes sense.
Craig, based on what you were saying earlier, is it okay that Chisago is on here?
Yes, I feel they should be on this one. They're a member of the steering committee.
Okay, so they're a member of the steering committee. They're just not allowed to be the fiscal recipient for the grant fund.
Unfortunately, they're not allowed to be a member of the.
Okay. Sorry.
On the first page of this form, it asks for a completed appendix C, the second bullet there. And I was looking at that and reminding myself, have we gotten that, say, for this cattle exclusion project? that we're test driving? Okay.
I think so. I think we got it for both and the South Washington watershed district spreadsheet with what the subcommittee ranked the project as.
Okay, so the subcommittee fills that out.
That was my understanding. It's always just been sent to me, and I assumed that the subcommittee had ranked it, and that's how it got ranked.
Should that be clear as who fills that in?
That could be a little note saying completed during or from subcommittee meeting. Craig, did you have a question?
I was going to clarify that. So Matt Moore completed, and so did Mike Eising, the first round. They completed their own attachments, the appendix Cs, and submitted those with their applications. And so did NSWC. Paul actually reached out to me, and we completed that together. And so I would recommend having the applicant fill that out, and the subcommittee and review that if they have questions.
That makes sense to me.
I thought there was a column on there for the committee to write in scores to.
I can open that and show everybody what that looks like. I will just open the one from the cattle exclusion project, since we're going to be talking about it anyway. I don't know why it's opening so slow. Super slow. All right. Oh, I see what you were saying, Tiffany, that there is the proposed score and then there's committee score. Is it subcommittee or steering committee when you say committee score?
I think we really should have a subcommittee doing that scoring, at least concurring with it.
That makes more sense to me too, because by the time it comes to the steering committee, it would make more sense to say, okay, the subcommittee has, ranked this as a 20 out of 25 available, and therefore that's why we are proposing that you approve it.
Right. I mean, actually, technically reviewed the ranking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I thought that there was, okay, this hit. I thought that originally it was in the version that I got from Matt, there had been a duplicate row, but maybe that is taken care of in this one. Maybe that got removed.
There was a duplicate row, and Paul and I took it. Also, we need to make sure we're clear that you don't get points for both lake restoration and stream restoration. We need to add that in this application. If people, you need to go to appendix C to get back one, because this one that Matt had a duplicate, and you got points for both. Not that we scored on an issue, but
okay,
you don't get points for both of those first two.
Yeah, I know when I sent out the e-newsletter to the policy committee, I looked at the table. I noticed that there was duplicates, and so that I just in my mind took away one of them and added up what the total was, so that it would be, I would be sharing correct information with them. So this form is in the actual plan. Is that what you're saying, Craig?
I just went to the website, the lower site, Croix website. You can click right out. There's a link there to click on appendix C.
Okay.
And I think that's easy. Maybe we need to put it as a link somewhere or something. Maybe that needs to go on the flow chart. Just having access to that link to make sure we're using the current one.
Okay.
We'll put it right in this form regardless. It needs to be on this. So we just click on it and fill out the application. There's questions.
Okay, so the ranking is done by the applicant and the committee. You're getting from appendix C. Link on the flow chart to the website. I'm just speaking out loud while I'm typing. Okay, so then the next item on the agenda is the SharePoint folder network. Emily put together a network of folders for us to share files or to store files related to notes from subcommittee meetings, documents related to projects that are getting funded. I just created a easy for me to remember tiny URL link, because I figured if I would continually forget what the location of those folders were, other people might too. One moment, the dog's about to bark. So here I have populated the folders with all of the stuff that's been sent to me so far, but what Emily and I are hoping is that everybody who is the lead for a subcommittee will kind of take for putting documents into the folders on the shared drive as you're getting them.
I think I saw maybe Susanna in one of your emails. Sorry, I'll stop now.
You were good.
I won't ever say anything again. Susanna, can you get into these SharePoints? You seem to allude that you can't, like counting insertions or something.
Right, I wasn't able to. It just says in the message that pops up that that my email address could not be found in the directory, in the SharePoint.com directory. So I don't know.
So, if I remember correctly, Susanna, doesn't Chicago County have a thing where you use Google Drive?
Oh gosh, one of many things we are not allowed to use.
I told Emily, I said, well, some people use SharePoint instead of Google Drive, because I know Chicago can't use Google Drive, but now you can't use SharePoint either.
I think I had access before. It may be that, I don't know, it may be there was a recent update that had kicked me out. I didn't know enough of what's going on in the background in our IT here that wouldn't allow me, because this month before I didn't have access, and then something happened to allow for me, and then I couldn't see this
SharePoint. And we are not able to upload files into Google Drive, but I can do Google Documents. I may not even be supposed to do that. Do that in the counties. I do access Google Drive, but.
Okay. I mean, I guess if it's only a problem, you just send me, I put them on there if that's the easiest workaround.
The reason I asked was I was wondering how many others, maybe Matt, Craig, Tiffany, I got a security problem with it. The list is growing. And
Oh,
I wish this,
must do.
it's like there's nothing that we're all allowed to do, but I don't know the solution. Access no go for me.
There's ways that this is just your IT purpose, you're gonna have whitelisted, but good luck getting it.
Yeah. I've
I
spent
don't
tons
know
of
if
hours on it.
For me, at least, I don't know if it's because we can't do it at Washington County like Google Drive either, but I'm using remotely. And since I'm out, I can access Google Drive. So you would assume that I would then be able to access the SharePoint, and we use SharePoint at the county, but I still can't. So I think that there might be something else going on, if that makes sense.
And Emily did send me, she shared the folder with me, so I'm going to try, I can open it, and I tried to get into the tiny URL site, but that didn't work. So I'll keep trying. Thank you, Emily, for sending that.
Okay.
Well, maybe I was thinking maybe if I shared it directly with everyone instead of just creating a link and having you click the link, but it sounded like that's still not working. I'm not really sure what kind of a system would work.
I mean, I'm just kind of at loss as to what to suggest instead.
Jennifer, I think it's OneDrive. Is it OneDrive, Jamie, that we're using for the RUM project, and it seems like it works for everyone?
I think so. I think for that one, maybe I'm the only one looking into it. It's a different reason. My account was flashed for being a bad guy, sort of a bad boy.
But yeah, you don't access OneDrive off of the USA network.
Yep, yeah.
It should work for me.
Okay. I've never used OneDrive before, but I'm sure we could get that set up and just migrate everything over to OneDrive. If that's going to work better.
I thought that it was OneDrive. What's the difference between SharePoint and OneDrive?
What's the same when I tried to access them? I don't know.
I don't know. We can research. We'll get back to you all. We'll research and get back to you all. Okay, we already decided we don't want to rehash the many updates that were just given at the policy committee meeting, but let us perhaps go on to talking about the Pine SWC Kinsey Cattle Exclusion Project. Shall we do that? And let me pull that document up for everybody to see. Well, there were several documents that were in there. Okay, so here we go. So we have the Kinsey Cattle Exclusion Project. Is there somebody from Pine SWCD here, or are you going to talk about it, Craig?
Well, Zach is here. I can start.
Zach is here, yes.
I will just start quick. The steering committee met last week, talked about this project. Thought it was a very good project. It's a landowner who's going through the Municipal Ag Water Quality Certification Program. Currently has cattle direct access to the Rock Lake, which is one of our priority lakes. The cattle actually present in some of the photos you could look at on Google Earth and things like that, which I thought was pretty good picture to see. Landowner's going to fence the cattle out and put in a 50-foot buffer. The group elected to go with a 5% cost share on this project. I believe it's $5,100, a total of $6,000. So it was a unanimous decision by the members present, which is on those minutes. I forget who was all present, but there was several of us there, 8, 9 of us present. There's Zach. I'll turn over to you to kind of explain the process in a little more detail.
Yeah, good job going through it all. But yeah, so Ryan out of the Carlton SWCD has been working with them as the water quality certification, and finally he's going to get his house on a rock lake. And so we're going to do 50 setback, and the fencing on that site is 905 feet. So we're looking at 0.6 acres of buffer that's going to be planted, and kind of a side benefit of filtering nutrients, but also stabilizing any shoreline erosion or riparian erosion that the cows are causing. They're going down to the lake and the pressure. And this is just going towards him getting his certification. We've got a number of things that he's doing on his property to kind of clean up the water that's coming off of it. And then I know we some questions from last time. How was the fence going to keep the cattle from just going around the fence and back into the lake? And there's on both sides of the fence, it's a pretty deep type 3 wetland. Ryan said that he doesn't see the cows coming back into the lake with that buffer. Yeah, I think that's everything. Happy to answer any other questions that anyone has.
Zach, do you know if there's other things that this landowner has to do to become certified, or is this kind of the final project?
I don't actually know what he is in that process right now.
Thank you.
Emily had a question.
Yeah, so is it a complete, I talked with, and full disclosure, I'm not an ag expert, but my supervisor, of course, Mike Haney, knows a lot, and I spoke with him briefly about this project, and he was kind of wondering, is it complete exclusion, or is it going to be kind of a rotational? He was talking about there might be a benefit to be had from just rotational grazing rather than complete exclusion. I'm sharing to an article that he sent.
Yeah, how it seems now is it's going to be complete exclusion with some consideration for flash grazing through the buffer.
Okay.
And you mean rotation grazing, like going through that area, right? Am I understanding that?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Emily, what they're referencing that flash grazing, that would be what Mike was talking about. So they monitor, maintain that and do flash grazing for vegetation health.
Okay.
Zach, is the cost listed there a stat estimate, or is it a contractor's quote?
That came from Ryan.
Okay.
So staff.
Is there a contingency in it? It's knowing that it's a little higher?
Not in that specifically, but finance and utility is ready to handle if there is any issues where we need a little extra money.
Very good. Thank you.
My recommendation is very honestly for myself. I prefer to go back to the $6,000 total project cost with a $5,100 grant funding process instead of going $6.18. If that's okay with the group, I'd rather go back to what this committee recommended.
I'm okay with that.
Does anybody object to that funding it at the $5,100 level?
I don't object. I have just one more question. Angie, if you're sharing your screen, would you pull up the aerial of the project?
Yeah.
I want to know. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I see. Okay, so the requested grant funding on this form, it says $5,006, and you're saying Craig just bumped it to $5,100.
Which was the amount the subcommittee recommended.
Okay.
That was the original request.
Okay. So you wanted to look at the aerial, correct, Emily?
Yeah.
I think I found that would get us there. Oh, that's a good one. I didn't know that Excel spreadsheet turned into a wonky thing when it got PDFized.
Oh, and maybe I kind of missed it earlier talking about getting this farm clean water certified. So are there other things we're doing to prevent erosion on those surrounding fields? Because again, Mike pointed out, you can sort of see some erosion just above that 297-foot little text bubble. Looks like there's some erosion in that field. So what other practices are going on to prevent erosion in the crop fields?
Yeah, I know that he's still continuing to work with Ryan and will be doing other practices, but I have not been involved with that process just yet. So I can't speak to specifically what he's doing, but that he will continue to be working on implementing more BMPs so he can get certified.
Okay. Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Would it be prudent for this group to consider, I'm just pulling out the photo because I'm guessing this is probably a 2017 photo. Do you know that, Zach, for sure?
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Because as I'm looking at a 2000. Just a second here. As I look at a 2017 photo, Emily, those erosion sites are all gone. And so I'm wondering what year this photo is from for Mr. Hinsey's farm. And that's why I asked that question, because it might be one of those things, and I don't know, as he's becoming ag water quality certified, that'd be a question for Ryan Clark, the resource specialist up there. He would have to definitely address all those issues. And so I don't know if Mr. Hinsey has gone to a reduced tillage method. I don't know if he's gone with cover crops. But that's a very good question that you raised there. And I don't know if we postpone this project, Zach, for a month, because we want to learn a little bit more of those questions. Is that a deal breaker for this project?
Maybe
and I'm not proposing that. I'm just asking that question.
Maybe not a full deal breaker, but it would be more difficult because then we'd still have to wait for your board to meet to recommend. So we'd be looking at, moving it back. What would that end up being? More like a month and a half. So that would be a little bit tougher. And I do know, like, specifically if you're looking at those cattle trails that are down there, Ryan, I had asked about those, and Ryan said that that he doesn't see any erosion in that pasture, but as to the fields around the area, I can't speak to those.
I would
Maybe
totally be in favor of like voting to move this one forward. Even like if he's going to do projects in the future, but a lot of times it just starts with one project. And this seems like an awfully good starting place.
And then maybe report back, just so we can, just for our own curiosity of kind of answering that question about what other practices are going in.
Yeah,
and for our own reporting, I think I'd want to report on that.
Yeah, and I can send that out either in an email, kind of following up. I'm meeting with Ryan next week anyway, so I could follow up next week, or once the this install is complete, I can include the other work being done in, I guess, a report that I would submit to the committee. I'm not sure what happens at the end. just yet. We'll find out when I get there.
I support this project, and I don't think we need to slow it down. If we look at any project or any property, we're going to be able to identify other things that they might be able to do. So unless there's some really glowing problems that aren't, and the proposed BMP isn't actually addressing the issue at hand, I don't see any reason why we would not support a high quality project like this. And we can get that information in later and provide it as sort of just for information.
Okay, so do we want to go ahead and take a vote? Okay.
Angie, are you going to keep track of the vote, or do you want to do by just, if, does anybody object?
Yeah, are there any objections from the group? That is probably a much easier way for me to keep track of it.
I wonder if we shouldn't do an actual vote. At the last meeting, I just kind of sat back and let the group decide because I wasn't really sure. I think it might be good to just get an actual vote and have people commit or not commit.
I'm okay. There's not that many people in the group, so I am okay keeping track if we do a vote. All right, so Jay.
Support, yes.
Yes. Okay, Jamie.
Yes.
Jamie, who are you representing, both in your opinion?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, but I think I only count as one voice.
Well, no, you're representing my both.
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
You're the representative for both the ACD and sometimes we're Chubby Hole on that committee.
And Matt there as well. Who's he representing then?
Matt, you're the one representing from the Washington Conservation District.
You saying that because I'm on the Sunrise Board?
I am, yes.
But we're not having
We agree that any other staff person can represent both. I'm speaking as a Sunrise Board member and I'm the Middle St. Croix administrator at the moment.
As awkward as it feels, my ACD votes yes, and my Sunrise vote is yes.
Okay, and Tiffany.
Yes.
Okay, Jerry.
Yes.
Okay, Zach.
I used to mind saying.
I don't think you do. No.
Okay, well, it's second.
Yeah. Okay, Craig.
Yes.
Just to clarify, Zach, we're a committee. We're not a board.
No.
Yeah.
So yeah, you
Yeah.
can all vote.
Susanna.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see, Maureen.
Yes.
Right. Matt. Down. Matt.
I said yes.
Oh, muted. Okay. All right, Emily.
Yes.
Okay. Did I get it? I did remove this data. Oh, no, where'd you come from? Have you been here all along? You must have just appeared there for voting. Hey, Matt Moore. You have just voted whether or not we agree high enough for UCD capital solution. Okay. All right. I think that's everyone then who has voting ability. So moving on then. Hold on, are you seeing right now? Are you still seeing more having these rolling frantically upwards to get back to the agenda?
Yes.
All right. So then the next thing, upcoming workshops and events, I just wanted to make note of the fact that I have begun adding things to our St. Croix Watershed Plan website. There are events on there, just have an additional place where they get put out. And I think over the next couple of months, Barbara and I might continue making some tweaks to that website, including perhaps changing the landing addresses. So instead of saying LSC 1W1, it would be like, I don't know what it is, Lower St. Croix Partnership or something like that. That is more illustrative for what we do for our doing. So just that as a note. We talked with Jeff Forster from Minnesota Lakes and Rivers Advocates last week, and they're having a lot of success with the lake stewardship program and engaging lake associations and promoting shoreline reservations and other shoreline friendly stuff and having the lake associations really take ownership of that. And so he's super excited to work with us on that, and we're going to begin trying to engage a bunch of our lake associations in the watershed in that program. And then I just wanted to make note of the fact that there's been a lot of conversation. We have the existing MREC partnership. We have the new education that's happening through the watershed-based implementation funds, and we kind of differentiate what is happening with what pot of funds and for whom. So there is the existing MREC partnership that is completely funded through local partners, and that has been going for 15 years, and that funds all of everything that we've been doing in Large County for the past 15 years, but a focus on stormwater education for like smaller suburban and urban landowners, and also support for partners and whatever it is that they're doing, whether it's developing a watershed plan, meeting their MS4 permit requirements, implementing a project that they just got state grant funding for, that kind of stuff. We have a funds that will allow for Barbara's time to do general outreach education and the partnership to focus on rural landowners engaging lake associations and outreach and education to cities for updating their stormwater and other ordinances, stormwater and shoreline ordinances. So it's kind of like a separate set of activities that is very similar. There's going to be a lot of overlap, but it's going to be much more focused on the rural landowners. And I know that I reached out to a number of you in the northern part of the watershed and said, do you also want to join MRF? Because that will allow us to have a little more staff time, a little bit more personal support, and also have a materials budget, because that was one thing that I'm a little concerned about at the north part. We don't actually have funds currently written into the grant to support additional materials. So just wanted to make note of that, and I can answer any questions that anybody has. A lot of you have one-on-one, but if anybody wanted to ask any more questions right now, we can answer. All right. So I imagine in the next year, as we like move forward into implementation, it will become less muddy than it is right now, and we'll either say, great, everything's working out great as it is, or we need to better meld the programs or better separate the programs. So we'll just keep on keeping on. Are there any other subcommittee dates that anybody feels were not adequately covered during the policy committee meeting that you want to talk about with the steering committee right now?
Yes, talking about activity 7, the internal analyses for that.
Okay.
And I did email you
Yeah.
PDF documents.
Yeah, do you want me to share those with the group right now?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
And then I will add all of the documents onto that SharePoint site.
Yeah, and I think that I already put those on a SharePoint site for you, actually, the 2 ones that you just sent to me.
Oh, great, thank you.
So just give me one moment to get on in there. Okay, so this is one of the things that you sent, Susanna.
Yes, that is our application, project application. And the second document is our selection criteria.
Okay. One moment, please, while I selection criteria. Sorry for narrating what I'm doing. Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. So our subcommittee, we met last Thursday. We updated both the application and selection criteria, and since then have been making some changes. And I think after today's meeting, we'll continue to make changes and hopefully have one more subcommittee meeting in August and then finalize the application and the criteria, and then bring it back to this meeting to finalize the review. So essentially, there are some things highlighted, technically, the chance to finalize, or we have some questions on. And so overall, if you remember, the purpose of this is to calculate the internal loading of phosphorus of 2 primary lakes. The budget's $50,000, estimating $25,000 for 2 lakes. It just really will depend on the size and the applications that we receive. And so really we're trying to determine which lakes, with our application, which lakes have addressed external loading of phosphorus to ensure that the future loading and treatment will have the best success. So that's the goal with our criteria, to award analysis to those lakes. And so we have 3 different parts with our application. And with the application section, there are one section. Yes, if you could go over to the application. And you could scroll down to the page, please. Right, and so that starts our first section, requesting summary information, questions 1 through 14. And then on the next page, we're also requesting a consultant quote for information and deliverables A through F that are in that document. And then the next section, there's the submittal deadlines, and then we also have on that last page a listing of the table 4 least significant waste, which is in the comprehensive watershed management plan. And the subcommittee overall wanted to make sure that we were writing our selection criteria, that we were matching apples to apples. We're asking for information in the application, so we weren't missing out any information. We weren't having to go back and look up that information ourselves. And so we really tried to make that matching happen. And so what we can do now is go through number 1 through 14 in the application and review each. And if you have any suggestions or changes, or if something you want to look into more detail there, you could send those comments to the group, and also to look at our selection criteria and see how we are ranking each of what we are receiving through that summary information in the application. So then starting on requirements, again, we want to know the lake name, the location, information about the lake. Number 5, is it a lake associated with a DMDL or RAPS, and then providing reference or a link to documents where that lake is discussed. Number 6, asking if diagnostic monitoring has been conducted on the lake to determine impacts of external loading, and providing a brief narrative. I think that was the theme overall, that we wanted more summary and detailed information, but to keep it brief. And then also including a link to the Forest Watershed District 2020 monitoring program recommendations as a reference for applicants to know what we were meaning by diagnostic monitoring. Number 7, providing a brief history on the lake and discussing the need for internal phosphorus loading, listing the percentage of shoreline developed. And then also providing in number 9, a brief history of water quality improvement projects, including estimated phosphorus load reductions, best management practices completed in the subwatershed, total percentage of external watershed load completed. So really getting an idea of what's happening externally, and then considering what the future will be for that internal analysis and future loading treatments. And number 10, and briefly describe the percentage of phosphorus treated and methodology used to determine the percentage. And then 11, provide an explanation of any other in-lake treatment completed in the past 15 years, considering that those treatments. And then aquatic invasive species. Now, some of these questions they were difficult to rate. We wanted to ask what was happening in the lake. Not all of these items that we're receiving in the summary we are rating in our selection criteria, which I will review. But with this, we do want to consider if there's invasive species and how that might affect any future treatment of future phosphorus loading treatment. If there is an abundance of common carp, curly pondweed, is that going to negate any future treatment? So we want to consider that, and then ask if it's present or absent in the lake. And excuse me, if present, then what is the density? Are they doing any management practices? How much of the lake is infested? Providing that information in their application. And what's next? Deciding boating traffic. Knowing that boating traffic, wakeboard boating, can disturb the sediment in the lakes, and that could affect any future treatment. Now, this one was difficult to score because how do you rate boating traffic? We had to go with that. How do you define it? And those on the lake could say, oh, there's so much wakeboarding going on, and it could be from one boat, or it could be from boat. So we had some difficulty with that, so we did not include that in our selection criteria. And that's one of those that, yes, we're asking, we're not screening it, but we do want to know because it's an issue, that there could be potential disturbance of lake sediments. And then the last is briefly describe future plans to finance and implement internal phosphorus load treatment. This one we are scoring, and we'll look at that shortly. And so that's the first set of information, getting a summary of those 114. And then the next is reviewing consulting quotes, including that was the cost for the information and deliverables A through F. Providing a summary of all available water quality monitoring data. There may be gaps with that, but there may be some that would have that information available. Modeling to determine amount of external versus internal fish loading if available, and then any estimates of invasive species, and to schedule identifying the anticipated number and amount of treatment and doses. Effectiveness, determination of effective life of project, and develop a management strategy, includes future maintenance, and identify the entity responsible for the maintenance. And then the last part is what they need to do to submit the application, including the deadlines for selection, and the deadlines for submitting the application and deadlines for selection. I think that's also one of the main things to talk about today, if there's going to be a standard group timeline for those applications.
It doesn't go to policy committee, it goes submitted the recommendation by the steering committee, and the Chisago receive approval, not the policy committee.
Okay, I'll change that. So right where it says, and that's on the fourth line.
Yep.
Okay, I will update that.
Should there be a goal is to have them selected by March or December 31st, just in case we have a lot of questions and things. I mean, so it's a very tight window, 2-month turnaround, November, December, that you have listed. Basically, deadline of October 31st, have them in. And with the Christmas holiday and New Year's, I think that's a very, very tight window to be 2 months. That means it has to go through the subcommittee and steering committee in November, and my board in December.
Okay, is the timeline, is that doable, or could we push it?
It's doable. I'm just saying, if there's any hiccup at all, we don't meet that timeline. You said application will be selected by December 31st. That could be a non-realistic goal potentially. A very difficult goal to meet.
I agree.
Okay. So we could change that applications. What would be maybe select? Do we have a time frame, like a range?
I think the application deadline is October 31st, and then it goes through the process after that. Whether it's December, January, February, gets approved. That's kind of time frame.
The time for implementation.
I'm sorry, last year, what was that?
What's the timeline for implementation, though?
The grant agreement is a 3-year grant agreement. The grant agreement expires at the end of 2023.
Okay, maybe I missed, but so who's applying?
To be determined. It would be one of the 16 partners, one of the 16 signatories to the Joint Powers Agreement, be ultimately applying.
Okay. So we don't have any time on implementation.
Would that be then the end of? It would be the end of 2023 that they would have to have these studies completed.
Yeah, so I agree with Craig. I think we just put in an application deadline and let the process go from there.
Okay. Okay. If we note also then that the expiration would be 2023.
What I would prefer, Susanna, what I would prefer, because our grant agreement, as soon as we spent all the funds, the grant agreement's done, we're moving on to the next round of funding. My recommendation would be, as we're working through these requests, we put a date down there as a group that says we want this done by this date, and not necessarily 12. We don't want to give them technically necessarily 2 years to get the study done. Maybe it's supposed to be working with my consultants that are doing this work. Maybe they need 12 months. So we put an agreement of 12/31/2020 to have the project done. I'm saying that's something that can be real in details as we work through the selection process. Maybe that's one of the questions, like what's their time frame to have this completed?
Okay. We could add that within our application requirements to have them submit that information. Okay. I think we can, unless there are any other comments or questions, we could go on to the selection criteria.
Susanna, this is Matt again. Do you have boat counts from your AIS work up there?
Yes, we do have, well, we have surveys that have been completed. We track that information each year. The watercraft inspection surveys, boat counts. Do you mean anything other than what the inspectors are doing?
No, just I think if you have numbers of boats that are going through landings, I think that's good enough for your boat stuff. whether it's a wake boat or a fishing boat, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Just would show what the general traffic is.
That would be good to include, yes. Some of the lakes listed in that table 5.4 do not have a public water access. And so, you know, we don't have information on the traffic on that, on those.
Yeah, just be whatever you got. Yeah, for
Mhm.
public access, it gives everybody a good feeling for what kind of activities going on in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Downing.
We can also report the types of boats that are at each lake. The watercraft inspectors will want that information, so we can get to a specific level of detail. We just on the both lakes with public water access, but just not those smaller lakes.
But you need to be a little careful with that because not everybody sees the same unit effort. So just because one has less counts doesn't mean that there's boat traffic. Just might mean there's less people there for less hours counting. So you have to take that into account when you're using that data.
Right. It's hard. We try to get the inspectors there at every access, but it's hard to predict where the boating activity, where the tournaments will be. They will just pop up, some smaller tournaments, so that can be difficult to predict. Okay, thank you. We can move on to the selection criteria. And there are two sets of questions, what our subcommittee described as gatekeeper questions, yes/no questions. So the first is the lake in the application a priority A or B lake. That's in that table 4 from the implementation table. And then has internal and external phosphorus loading calculated for the lake. In that application, again, a yes/no question. It has been or has not, and we're really looking for lakes that have addressed that internal phosphorus loading, or significantly addressed it. And with our first ranking question, is the lake in the application associated with a TMDL or RAP to identify the waste load allocation compared to internal load contribution? And if it's either a 0 or a 1, it has or it has not. Next question, what is the plan to finance and implement internal load treatment based on findings from the internal analyses report? What is their plan for the future? Will they implement treatment within 2 years, giving that a rating of 5, within 3 years, a rating of 4, 4 years, and so on. So ranking the application based on that. The third has the lake, has it resolved watershed external loading of phosphorus? And this, one of the most significant rating criteria, they get a 10 if they resolve 100% of external loading of phosphorus, a 9 if they resolve 90%, and so on. Resolving less than 50% and receiving a score of 0. So really trying to determine which ones have resolved most externally before awarding these funds. And then the next, the 4, 5, and 6, the subcommittee has not fully addressed number 4, and that's rating diagnostic monitoring. And then, unless if we have any additional comments, we do need to go back to the committee and review that. Numbers 5 and 6, these are things the subcommittee did talk about, but there's some things that I added after the meeting, so again, need to fully review this. But how to rank AIS, and it's either it's present or it's not. And if it's not present, it essentially may not affect future internal phosphorus loading treatment, and receiving a ranking of 5 for that. And I guess, how do you address the rest? Is it 2? If there are 2 AIS populations in the lake, if there's curly-leaf pondweed and Eurasian water milfoil, how is that going to address future treatments? 3 or more, you see Holland carp to that list, or zebra mussels, how is that going to affect? And then the next is considering if external loading factors will negate the effectiveness of phosphorus loading treatment. So are the external load reductions significant to make a future treatment effective, or are there, and that would have the highest ranking, or are there some gaps that would kind of hinder that future treatment success, and there would be a ranking of 3 for that, and then significant gaps would be 0. So that is what we have so far. And like I said, we'll have to have another meeting in August with the subcommittee, and then bring this back for final review.
So Susanna, am I understanding correctly that the project applicant fills out the funding request, and then the subcommittee is the one who uses this selection criteria?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, and then getting back to that first page on the qualifying project applicants that we had discussed that earlier in the meeting. So we'll be updating that section.
I have one question for the subcommittee. The page that Angie has open, it looks like there's quite a bit of information that needs to be collected there, potentially working with the consultant, stuff. Am I correct on that review? Pretty detailed, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, we'd ask for some detailed information.
We're looking at potentially 2 awards for this one. What I'd hate to see happen is 5, 6, 7 members put a lot of time and effort into this. Do you want to have, even if it's a date where applicants say, yes, I'm interested in applying, so you know how many you're dealing with here and they know how many they're dealing with? Because it looks like a lot of work to get this first page pulled together, or a fair amount of time and effort.
Yeah, and at the very least, it requires a consultant quote to give you a cost and some of that information.
That's what I see too, and I wonder if it's one of those things where you want to have a preliminary, just, are you interested in applying for these funds, knowing there's enough for probably 2 applications? That way you know if you're dealing with 2 or if you're dealing with 16. It might weed out a few people to say, I don't want to go through this process.
Yeah, I have a similar question as well, because this is starting to look and feel like a competitive grant process.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, how do we evaluate the legitimacy of a project without having people go through all that extra effort?
I saw Matt Downing and Jerry Spetzman both have questions.
I'll throw out that. Go ahead, Matt.
I was just saying, I was disagreeing with what they were saying. Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay.
Well, one observation I had working through this process is, for the most part, the Northern Lakes don't have the staff or resources taking it to the point where we can fill out the application. I think there needs to be capacity building in the northern half of the watershed just to, have the monitoring done and to even complete the form, the application form. I think it's just a capacity building need that we have in the northern part. Because I can think of lakes where there's substantial internal loading problems. We wouldn't have wherewithal to do all the diagnostic monitoring and checking wetlands, and there just isn't the resources to even get to the point of filling out an application. So that's my comment.
Right, and that is true. In the northern half, it would be difficult to pull that together. I know that with the subcommittee, they overall did focus on wanting to reduce that, have the external load reduced, and did add some consideration within the selection criteria. We can adjust the criteria to recognize that the gaps in that would happen in the applicants from the northern part of the watershed. And maybe something I need to go back to the committee and discuss, and how we can maybe even reduce the number of questions that we're asking, or like you had said, to have the preliminary information out there so applicants know what they're looking at and know there is only going to be a couple lakes selected. And one of the things that one of the members at the policy committee, it was Jackie, she recommended or liked having the selection criteria available for the applicants to review, and maybe that would be one way that applicants could easily decide, sure, we'll go ahead, we'll fill out all the information, or not apply, knowing that they may not score or rank high enough to receive the funding. That's another item that the subcommittee could consider.
Emily, I think I saw your hand next.
Yeah, thanks. I think Susanna kind of touched on what I was sort of thinking is you can still apply, but I would think if an applicant has no idea what the external loading looks like, it's the cart before the horse to apply for internal analysis at that point.
And I agree with what Emily's saying. It's just, if we're looking at a watershed focus for the whole, one watershed, one plan, I do think we need to do some capacity building in the northern half of the watershed. And I'm not really sure how to make that happen, but just in fairness, we need more resources to get projects done.
Jay?
Thank you. I'm wondering if we need to have a little bit more coordination between the subcommittees, because for me, this feels like one of those situations. I mean, internal loading is more complicated than a lot of other type of projects, and there's more evaluation that's necessary. And perhaps we use the criteria that all the other subcommittees are using to determine if a lake kind of BMP implementation for that lake is going to be a priority. And then that's kind of your first cut, using the same criteria that we use for all the implementation activities. And then if you don't have adequate data to evaluate whether or not internal load reduction should be done at this point, or if you need to do watershed reduction first, then you try to look at applying for some of the prioritization funds, a feasibility study or some other sort of analysis that that come from a different budget line item.
Right, so the standardized data, again, we can bring that back to the subcommittee. So there basically would be two different sets. One, they would go through our selection criteria as well as the standardized selection criteria. Is that what you were referring to? I just want to make sure that.
What I'm suggesting is that we have a evaluation process criteria that are more common to all the subcommittees, and that if we need more detailed evaluation, that's more of a prioritization process.
Okay.
And yes, there's a lot of conversation about code, and I'm hearing my own echo, and I don't like it.
Okay. That usually happens to me when I host Teams meetings when I'm working from home. Everybody can hear an echo, but I can't. And yeah, that's.
Find it specifically whenever you are, not to point fingers at you, but whenever you are unmuted, there's always an echo, and then as soon as you're muted, the echo goes away.
Oh my gosh, it's following me everywhere. I don't understand. In the office, at home. Oh, there's one more thing that happens with my computer, my work cell phone. Okay.
So I guess I'm gonna temporarily mute you just so I can talk about echo. So I'm seeking clarity from the steering committee on what you are suggesting or requesting that the internal loading subcommittee do as a next step.
Yeah, can I maybe try to summarize here? I think one is we need an initial screening of who's interested to do an internal loading study. Secondly, we need a reduction or a streamlining of this funding request form. And then it's going to be paired with the Appendix C, so it's all reason to shrink it down. And that seems to be more or less where we're going.
Did you say streaming of the application form or of the selection criteria?
Especially the application form.
Okay.
Selection criteria seem fairly paired to it, so it will be slimmed as well. This can be a complicated topic with determining whether internal loading is really the thing that we should be doing at this point in time with the lake. But we're diving deep enough here into it that we may be better off deferring to the local entity that's sponsoring the project. Do they think it's worthwhile? And if it is, we don't need to have vote counts and things like that.
Does anybody want to add on to what Jamie just said?
I think it's important for us to make sure that the subcommittees are coordinating, that each committee is developing their own completely distinct, separate process, and that we have consistent criteria, because all we're talking about is prioritizing DMP.
I agree with that. And I think there's a couple leads from different subcommittees maybe that we could have them just meet and look at work products so far and pick one template, have it look the same, and have it be consistent in its flow.
It's great to have this.
Right, and that came up within our subcommittee meetings. What type of application are we going to have, and how will it be different? And I think that was addressed in the planning committee meeting also, to have similar application deadlines, similar forms. So right, having that one template would be good. And also to note that whatever we adjust within our application questions, and we would adjust within our selection criteria. So that would become more clear for the applicant.
I think that gets back to kind of that concept. We need to move away from thinking about applications per se, and this is an annual budgeting process. We're not applying for a grant from this grant. We try to avoid a competitive process as much as possible, because it just adds the administrative costs. But we have to balance that with making sure we're doing a project. So that can be tough.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll keep moving forward. If there are any other suggestions, feel free, just let me know, and we'll address it with our next committee meeting. I don't have anything further.
I think I was being rude. I just muted you to get rid of the echo. Sorry. I think the only thing left was a progress update. I know Emily gave a phosphorus reduction progress update at the policy committee meeting. I don't know, Emily, if you recalculated that to include the cattle exclusion project. If so, that would be exciting to hear. And if not, there's probably no news.
It is just ever so slightly higher, because it went from 220 to 223.48 pounds. So yeah, we're about 3/4 of the way toward that 300-pound reduction goal for just activity 2. I think we're just over, it's kind of inverse. That's 3/4 of the way toward that goal. But then when you look at our total of 915 pounds, we're more like about 1/4 of the way toward that one.
Okay. All right.
And then I don't know, I should really, I haven't compared that to the spending, but I don't know at this point that, I don't know if it necessarily makes sense to say for the percentage toward the goal and this percentage spent, because it's, I'll leave it at that.
All right. Are there any topics for future meetings that people know right now we need to plan on talking about in August?
Can we talk a minute, Angie, about the discussion at the policy committee about this emergency project thing?
We talked about that at the very beginning, Matt.
Okay.
And
That's fine.
yeah,
That's fine.
okay. We're kind of a little confused as wanted, but what we think will help is if we share a flow chart, which is from what I sent out to the group yesterday.
Okay.
But,
that's good, as long as you guys talk about it.
and we thought also if they, once we have the selection criteria for all of these projects established and we share that with them, they'll probably have better confidence or understanding of how we're deciding which projects to fund.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that, I mean, projects pop up, I get that, but I just want to make sure that they don't think the McQuaid project is our normal business practice.
Yeah. Any other topics that people think we for sure should try to talk about next month in August?
Angie, I sent you an email yesterday with a project I do need to talk to you about on the planning team. So we'll be
Yes.
coming forward with some potential work plan stuff at the August meeting, so.
Okay,
But I want to discuss that with the planning team first.
okay. That was how to make adjustments to the grant work plan, right?
Yep, because we have overspent on activity 2. So we need to be able to make some work plan revisions.
Okay. Okay, that all good? Shall we adjourn?
I just want to thank Dan Fabian if he's still on. For those of you, I'm sure everyone knows now Dan's leaving. This is his last meeting. So Dan's been with us since day one of this process. He's been with us for the last 7.5 years, and I want to thank Dan very much. He's been a great PC, so thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for giving us your cell phone number so we can get in touch with you in the future. Really appreciate that over the years.
Actually, do that.
I don't know.
Dan.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Stop by.
Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate all the hard work you guys did over, especially on this St. Croix project, and then all the other projects and plans that we did. I kind of worked in this area since '84, so it's yeah, it's good. Thanks very much. I appreciate it, and feel free to get hold of me if you need something.
Dan, is there gonna be a party?
I don't know, put a big blow. We're actually for drinks on next Tuesday at the Wild Hog. Well, it's close to the Last Conservation District. So I Peppers.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, so we'll be there from 3 to 5 at least, or later. So feel free to stop by if you want. But other than that, I'm not having like a big bowl or anything. Just drinks.
I'll make sure to put that highlighted in yellow in extra minutes from today's meeting.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm putting that in for you, Dan.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to see if we can keep that up. We have a pretty nice patio area that negotiated. So yeah, who knows? I might even buy first round. Okay.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Dan, what are you gonna do?
I'm gonna be retired. That's it. I'm gonna figure it out starting August 4th. I'm shooting birthdays the evening August 4th. That's about the end of my plans.
Thanks again, Dan. And I
Thanks.
think we're ready to go, right?
Sounds good.
Awesome.